Welcome back to the My Story in Motorsport podcast, and today we are joined by Jordan King. A very interesting story within the world of single-seater motorsport. He's won multiple championships. He's even been a development driver in Formula 1 and stood on the top step of the podium on a Grand Prix weekend in GP2 and Formula 2. Very exciting story. Saw him race in America with IndyCar. He's raced at Le Mans and loads of amazing opportunities he's taken up throughout his career. But as we recorded this last year, his future was a little bit uncertain. After leaving Formula 2 in the previous season, he wasn't quite sure what the future had ahead of him. But nonetheless, a very talented driver in the world of motorsport, and of course, we're hoping that he goes racing again in 2021. You're a familiar name now in the world of motorsport with IndyCar fans, junior fans of motorsport, but so where does this sort of journey start for you?
Well, going back, way back when, I think first of all, I always wanted to be a sports person of some kind. Whatever that was, it was yet to be decided. But as a child, I was playing rugby, football, cricket, the standard kind of sports in the UK, really. Loved them. So would go to football matches, rugby matches with my dad and stuff like that, and always be out in the garden doing stuff. So I think in general, I always wanted to be involved in sport. Yeah. Just in what capacity, I wasn't sure. And then when I was 11 years old, I went indoor karting. There's a place just down the road from where I grew up. And, went there for my birthday. And it was kind of that age where quite a few friends had their birthday parties, or you go there for the weekend or whatever. So, got into it. Did reasonably well, won a couple, didn't win all of them. And then the guy that owns the place was like, you've come here now 5 or 6 times. Your son kind of knows how to get around a racetrack sort of thing. Yeah. Have you thought about doing it in a bit more capacity? But nothing more than that, really. Then when I was 12, I did actually start karting, looked into it a bit more, and proper karting, if you can call it that, outdoors. And I entered the British Championship and did that. And it all kind of just evolved from there, really. Then you move up the karting ranks from the British stuff through to the Europeans and then the worlds, and then obviously into cars when the time comes.
Yeah. So did you have any sort of idols growing up, like in terms of motorsport idols, or did you sort of just get involved with karting because you just wanted to give it a go?
No, I have very few idols in life, really, in general. I never really had idols growing up. I suppose the closest thing to an idol I did have was probably David Beckham. As my dad was a Manchester United fan, so I became a Manchester United fan, and he was their famous number 7 at the time. So he was probably the closest thing to an idol when I was a young child, and I met him actually in 2012.
Oh, wow.
So kind of came a bit full circle. But no, as of sporting idols, no, I had people that I kind of
liked, but sort of
or admire from what they've achieved. I not just in sport, just in general, I see people that have achieved great things, and I appreciate that. That's probably more where I'm at, is kind of appreciating what people have done with their lives.
So when you look back to the start, it looks like your family have always been really supportive of this journey, but looking back to those first sort of times in karting, did they want you to get involved with it, or did they want maybe for you to do something a little bit more safe?
No, in short, my parents have always been very supportive of everything I've done, whatever it is. From a young age, even if it's just sports day at school, they'd come along and watch. And I was fortunate, my mum could drive me to rugby matches and football matches and cross-country events and all that sort of stuff. And and then my dad actually more took the burden of the racing himself. Probably because he was living it through me as well. So no, but parents have always been supportive of myself and my sister. Whatever we've done, and they've always kind of tried to give us the best opportunity in whatever we've decided to do.
So on a different side note here, not something I didn't actually realise. I've been watching you obviously racing for quite a few years now. That as a child you actually had cancer, which thankfully you've overcome. But it's hard for me to talk about because I've never had to deal with anything like that. But how did you get through that situation?
Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I was young when I did. So actual memories of the process are zero, really. But the aftermath, obviously, I remember. So going through the process of being discharged, still going to the hospital on a regular basis. Obviously, when I first had the operation and chemotherapy and went through it. I was in and out of hospital on a very regular basis. And then I suppose probably when I was around kind of 10 years old, that had dropped to maybe every 6 months or every year that I would still be going back to Birmingham Children's Hospital to see a consultant. And I remember Mum picked me up from school one day and we drove up there, and I said to her, "Oh, will I have to do this for the rest of my life?" And Mum said, "Yes, even when you're a professional footballer, you'll still have to go and see the consultant every now and again." So,
did that change your mindset in any way? What you'd wanted to do as a career, or did you just not think about it at that stage? I suppose you're still a child.
I don't remember particularly growing up consciously thinking of it all the time, but it was always there. Even to the point when you get to the age that you can start drinking alcohol. I've actually, because of the cancer, I've only got one kidney. So there's complications with that. So yes, it has affected my life, and obviously I'm conscious growing up with only having one kidney to be sensible, because I don't have a second one.
Something that's always surprised me when I think about this, I mean, some kids are racing since they're like 4 or 5 years old. How do you sort of deal with the pressures of karting at such a young age? Or do you just not think about it, once again, because you're a kid? There's a lot of stresses. A lot of stresses in the world, but I think the biggest thing for me is I love my sport. I love competing. My parents always used to say if they ever wanted to get me to do anything, they would just make it a competition. I even remember, you don't realise so much at the time because you're just a child and you want to just do whatever. We'd all get in the car to go out for a day, and my mum had forgotten her jacket. And "Oh, Jordan, can you go and get my jacket from upstairs?" And I would say no, and then she'd go, "Oh, I'll time you." So of course I would then go running off to get it. So I think at a young age with the karting, you obviously want to win and do well, but you're also you're doing something that's amazing. You're driving a car that's 40, 50, 60 miles an hour when you're only, I started, I suppose, probably when I was 12. And yeah, I didn't like not winning to start off with, but I suppose for myself, it was actually you then want to work harder and do better. And then when you do get success, it feels good. So going on to that success, looking at your record, as I went to do for my planning for this, you've won multiple championships, come runner-up a couple of times as well. Do you have a special memory from the karting days, I guess?
I think annoyingly I finished runner-up more times than I actually a champion. But no, that's just one of those, you look back and go, well, 2 more points here and there. I could have won more championships. But there's a few things that do stand out in the karting world. I think first of all was my first ever race win. And it was pretty much a year to the day since I first started karting, so that was
quite
quick. Was really nice. Yeah, well, I've got it framed at home, and on there's Jake Dennis, Alex Albon. Who else is on there?
Some big names of the sport, basically. That
There's 4 or 5 people that have either got to F1, been in F1, and I think Jake was second, Alex was third. But yeah, it's that we were all 12 years old then, and we've all kind of followed each other on the way up to the top.
So then in 2010, after a few years of karting, you sort of get into Formula Renault for the first time. How big is that step up? Because I spoke to a couple of drivers about this. Some people think, it doesn't make any difference, it's just driving still. But some people have a massive gap here that they've got to learn a lot about. How was that for you?
It was difficult, don't get me wrong, it's difficult. Especially as well, I think for myself, I haven't come from a racing background. So it wasn't like I'd been around cars from a young age anyway. So actually getting into a car to drive it for the first time at 16 years old, roughly, off the top of my head, 16, 17, is actually, it's quite a daunting task. It's a 500 kilo car with 200 horsepower. It's miles quicker than any road car you'll ever buy in your life. A Formula Renault would still beat a Bugatti around a race circuit, no problem at all. So, it was quite a daunting task. But I think I took to it pretty quickly. Started to get on the podium, and I got a few pole positions in my first year. And then in the second year, I was then fighting for championship. So, it's one of those, your karting curve goes up. You finish your karting career winning everything, or trying to at least, and then you get back into cars, and there's you drop back down again and start another learning process.
And something that I found interesting about your racing record is you did Formula Parma Audi in some of your first races. That seems like a bit of a beast to be driving so early on. How did you cope with that? Because, that's slightly different to a Formula Renault, isn't it?
I actually preferred it. From a technical standpoint, the problem I had or have with modern race cars is they do a lot of it for you. Paddle shift and the like. Where with Parma Audi, actually, it still had a clutch on your foot. It was a hydraulic clutch. Had a H-pattern gearbox, but with a dog leg first. So to go first to second was a tiny little dog leg. And I actually preferred that. I feel like the harder it is, or the more technical, juggling, hands and feet, moving, doing other stuff, I seem to shine a bit more. Well, I feel like I have. Whether I have or haven't is a different one. But take Formula 3, for example. In my first year of Formula 3, it was a sequential gearbox. And I had a really good rookie year. And pretty much in my team, I was always the best on the brakes because I had quite a good feel for the change of the gears. And then the following year, in 2014, they went to paddle shift. And we had some other issues, mechanical failures and stuff. So I didn't do so well in the championship. But I don't feel I had as much advantage on the brakes as I did the year before, because everybody just came up to level, because the paddle shift, does it for you. You just pull it and the system sorts it out. So actually with Parma Audi, yes, it was a big, heavy car with a lot of power. But I feel relative when I first jumped into it, I actually kind of did better than when I first jumped into Formula Renault. Just because Formula Renault was easier to drive. I know that sounds counterintuitive. But it's easier for people to get to a limit in something like Formula Renault. You talk to see the guys in F1 now, they say how easy it is to drive. And the gap between everyone's so close because they're all just pushing it 100%, because the car sorts out all the little problems for you. But that's a good or a bad thing. It depends on your view. I don't think it's particularly bad.
And looking at the results you got in Formula Palmer Audi, to be fair, I mean, there's quite a few number ones in there. Did that sort of cement to you at that point that's what you wanted to sort of pursue as a career? Because as you say, you're still quite young at that point. You could still do multiple things.
No, the time for me that confirmed what I wanted to do, I was, so the school, well, I'll give you a bit of background. The school I went to, it was a boarding school, and I went there on a scholarship. It was a sports scholarship. So I got the scholarship about the same time I started karting. I went there, and my first couple of years there, I was in the football team, the rugby team, cricket team. You did the whole school sport thing and everything. And then actually, when I was 15, I broke my collarbone playing football. Wow. Of all sports, probably the same out of all of them. And I remember about a week before, I spoke to my rugby coach, and I was saying, Mr. Cook, his name was, and I was trying to persuade him that I didn't want to play rugby anymore because I didn't want to get injured. Because the racing was starting to get a bit better, and he wasn't having any of it, that I wasn't allowed to play rugby. And obviously he reminded me I was at the school on the sports scholarship. So, and then about a week later I broke my collarbone, which he found very funny that it was at football and I was trying to get out of rugby. And after that incident, I was then more disappointed that I couldn't go racing and play my other sports. So then in my mind, that told me what I wanted to do. Because I was still juggling my other sports, and I would sometimes miss a race to play my other stuff. So that told me what I wanted to do, because I didn't miss my other sports, but I missed the driving. And then there was a bit of a difficult conversation with the headmaster about I didn't want to play for the school anymore, but would they still support me in my racing career? And they did. They were really good.
Perfect. I mean, then over the next couple of years, sort of 2011, 2012, you did some racing in India, then you went to Europe in 2012, did the Formula Renault NEC, finished second, I think. So did that reaffirm to you that this is the right path now? Yeah,
I'd made the decision. I obviously moved into cars, and the move into cars is really, for me, was I broke my collarbone in my KF3 year, so it was the second last year of karting, just before the season started. So kind of that transition in my mind happened at the end of the karting career. So then when I stepped into cars, it was then, okay, this is, if I'm going to do it, I've got to give it the best shot I can.
Yeah, around 2013, this seems like quite a big one when I look at the progress throughout the years. You won the British Formula 3 Championship, and as you mentioned earlier, you finished 6th place in European Formula 3. I guess you've already sort of spoken about a little bit why that car meant so much to you and why you were so good in it, but why do you think that year clicked especially? Because that's quite a big step up once again, isn't it? Formula Renault to Formula 3.
Yeah, the team of guys around me at Carlin that year were really good. We put out a strong car. I was still learning though. There was still a lot. I was still young in my car career, so I definitely made a few mistakes. I made the British Championship harder for myself, that's for sure. I could have made that a lot easier, but I made a couple of small mistakes which cost me some points. But luckily, still got the British. So that stood out in my career as quite a big moment, really. When I got the trophy for the British Championship, and you look down at some of the names on it, and you're like, actually, this is quite cool. And I remember going to a British Formula 3 race, probably in around 2009, maybe something like that. So kind of 5 years before I actually stepped into it. And I think it was Daniel Ricciardo that year was the Red Bull driver. Max Chilton was there. Henry Arundel, I think, as well. So he's gone off to do other stuff. But yeah, and then you see kind of who's won it years before, who's come through, and to do that and be British champion. There wasn't a higher British accolade in motorsport really than British Formula 3 championship. So that for me was a big thing, and I remember for my dad as well. I think that was quite a big thing for him. Once, we don't talk too much about kind of things like that, but even him after, he was a bit kind of emotional about that one. So that was a real nice kind of homecoming. And then the European, it's just a bigger championship on some circuits I hadn't been to before, and people who have been doing it a bit more, a bit longer. So Rosenquist was in, I think, his third year or something when I first went into the European, for example. So to finish sixth and actually have a few podiums and challenge at the front was really nice, and kind of it was the first, I suppose, big step onto kind of the big stage where it followed DTM, so there's manufacturers involved. There's Mercedes and VW against each other on the engines, and lots of teams, they develop the car. That was a nice part about the Formula 3 back then, is you could change a few things on the car. So if you weren't so comfortable with the way the car was working, you could actually sit down with your engineer and come out with good solutions. Where with kind of full single make championships, you always end up finding you having to drive around fundamental things with the car, where actually in the old Formula 3 days you could change things on the car to help develop.
And to quantify the British F3 season, you beat Nico Latifi and Antonio Giovinazzi, who are currently in Formula 1. I guess British F3 in that form at least died a few years after your title win. But what made that so special? Because I remember going to, I think, the Brands Hatch round of the championship you won. Was there something special about that Formula 3 car? Because the one that's currently being used isn't quite the same.
No, I would still view that Formula 3 as proper Formula 3. In my mind, I grew up with Formula 3 being what that is. So it's still, for me, that is what Formula 3 is. It's a light car with about 250, 270 horsepower. But that, they were really light, had a shed load of downforce for the weight and the power. And you had the three dampers on the front, so you had left, right, and the heave damper. Same on the back. Formula 2, you're not allowed a heave damper, so you had so much more adjustment that you could change on the car. I alluded to a bit earlier. It was a really nice light car, and you worked with people in a way that some of the Formula 1 teams or like LMP1 teams work, because they can develop the car. Speak to the engine tuner, you would then speak to your data engineer, you speak to your race engineer, and you could come out with lots of little changes that would just help all together, really. Whereas now, with the way the junior Formula are, they're doing it to try and keep costs down, amongst other things. You can't change as much. Kind of what you've got is what you've got.
Yeah.
Still change things, don't get me wrong, but it's very limited. And actually, I think my Formula 3 years developed me as a driver much more than I would think the new Formula 3 stuff would, purely from the basis that you kind of just have to get in the car and drive it, and if it's a quick car, it's quick. If it's not, it's not. But with the old Formula 3, you could change your driving style, you could change things on the car more. So yeah, it's different, but in my eyes, I grew up with that Formula 3 being the kind of the pinnacle of, and people would go from that Formula 3 into Formula 1, where now, at Formula 3, you're still a couple of years away from getting to Formula 1.
And if we think about that season, finishing 6th, that's, in many people's eyes, good enough to make the step up to Formula Renault 3.5 or GP2 at the time. Was there any reason for you to stay in F3 for another year?
Yeah, it was my first big year in cars, and obviously I made a big step on. But there was still more to learn. I was still young. I was probably only 18 then, and other than a few people that either know the right people or in the right place at the right time, it just doesn't happen to normal people, I suppose. And then need another year to go for the championship. If I'd won the championship, that would have then been much more. If I then stepped up again, say to GP2, it's another change. It's something else to learn. It's a bigger car, it's faster. So yeah, I wouldn't change it. I would still stay another year. I would try and change what happened that year, but I would still think I would do what I did and do 2 years before.
I mean, to be fair, the 2014 F3 season was probably one of the most stacked grids I've ever seen in a junior Formula category. So I guess 7th probably, as you say, wasn't the result you wanted, but I guess the wheel-to-wheel battles with all those guys that you were racing against once again probably developed you into the driver you are today.
It's definitely helped develop me, don't get me wrong. I feel like it was kind of what could have been. You might quote me differently on this, but I think I had 9 podiums that year. And the previous year I had 2 or 3, but I scored less points in my second year than I did in my rookie year, even though I had 9 podiums. I think it might have been go conservative.
I haven't got it written down, so don't worry. I'm not gonna. We
had 50 podiums that year. So when you look from that standpoint, after I think it was 3 rounds or 4 rounds, I was 3rd in the championship, something like that, and literally a race win away from being kind of in the lead of the championship. And then we had 3 engine failures. With the way they had the regulations written that year, was that 1 engine change, you get a 10-place grid penalty for 3 races.
Jeez.
So I had 3 engine failures. So it's the equivalent of 90 places further down on the grid. And once I got through that process of the engine failures and kind of losing 90 places over those races, I was then down in like 9th place or something. And if you watch any old Formula 3 videos, where you qualify is where you race. So yeah. It was very frustrating actually, because the middle part of the year it was just kind of watching ourselves tumble down the order, but not a lot we could have done. And then the last few races of the year, I think the last round in Hockenheim, I was something like 3rd, 4th, and 2nd or something. So it was just annoying, because it wasn't like we'd lost. You look at it and I go, I finished 7th with less points than my rookie season, but actually we had a really strong year, other than kind of things that were out of our control. It was a bit annoying. We wouldn't have won the championship, but we definitely would have been solidly top 4 without.
And that's something that I guess a lot of fans, when I'm just going through and doing the research, I just see the result. I don't really see the individual reasons of why there's a 17th place in there, for example, or something. So yeah, I guess that's unfortunately how it went that year. But you make the step up to GP2 in 2015 anyway. I think that a lot of drivers mention is the change to Pirelli tyres. How did you find that?
To be fair, actually, I didn't find it too difficult. I think racing engineering, who I was with that year, helped me quite well, and I actually did much better on the tracks that had bigger tyre wear. So like Bahrain in the first race, there was a safety car and we got double stacked in the pit lane and stuff, so I lost a load of time. I ended up actually finishing 4th. It was like a first race in, we clearly had quite a good understanding of it. Then as the year went on, it ended up being kind of a bit of a like this that year really. So it was more just frustrating more than anything else. Some my fault, some not my fault, but yeah, I look back at that year and kind of think, if I could do it again.
It was around that sort of time as well that Manor, the Formula One team, were starting to struggle. I don't know if it's just what I've read, but it sounded like your father really helped save that team and help prolong its life. Did that feel like that was a way in, possibly in the future?
I suppose it was, yeah. My dad is done well in business in his life, so he knew Stephen, who ended up buying Manor. So he kind of helped advise Stephen on how to revive from the business side. And that then did kind of help open the door a little bit for a few opportunities for me. So I suppose it was a good way of getting your foot through the door. Unfortunately, it didn't last forever because they lost the prize money when Sauber got one extra point. Yeah. And that would have been 2015, I think.
And that basically was the end for them.
Yeah, so Sauber got the extra point and they lost the prize money and that was kind of the nail in the coffin. But for a couple of years, they gave me a few opportunities to kind of prove myself, really, which was...
I think all Formula One fans are appreciative that, Manor were around for a couple more seasons. It's always nice to see more teams on the grid.
Yeah, I think it is a big shame. Knowing the guys behind the scenes and stuff, they were starting to make some good progress. They finished 9th in Austria on real pace. It wasn't a safety car or a wet race or anything like that. They genuinely did finish 9th, which was the first time one of those privateers that came in 2012. No,
2010 was it? Around that sort of time.
Around that sort of time. It actually finished. Obviously, there was Jules Bianchi's one in Monaco, but that was a bit of a
chaotic race, wasn't it?
Lots of crashes going on. Yeah, we're actually in Austria. There was 22 finishes, and they finished 9th. So there was progress being shown, and actually, as just a sports fan, it would have been quite nice to see where they got to if they did keep the prize money. But then I suppose adversely, Sauber probably would have gone under if it was the other way around. So.
Talking of 2016, around that sort of time, you're doing stuff with Manor. A really good year in GP2, multiple wins, load of podiums.
I built up a really nice portfolio of partners and sponsors over the years, and that year we had 12 partners involved, and we had a big box at Silverstone, so we had almost 40 people there, and plus then a few friends and family as well, so it was probably close to 50. And then it's a home Grand Prix, so I like to think the Union flags in the grandstand were for me. Lewis was going to cost them.
Maybe, yeah.
There's some guy that races. But, it's just one of those special things. Even for our races, there was tens of thousands of people watching. As I mentioned, the Union Jacks in the grandstand, the BRDC, being a member of BRDC and part of the BRDC for a while. So, you look up there and there's actually people who want you to do well. Plus, then the people close to me, my partners and sponsors, and then friends and family. So it was just one of kind of those perfect weekends, really. And that for me really was the first time I suppose I stood back in my career and kind of looked at how far we'd come, in the journey. I remember going to Monza in probably about 2007, maybe in 2006. It's the first ever time I went to a Grand Prix. And I remember seeing GP2 at Barcelona a couple of years later. maybe actually even before that. And remember saying to my dad, well, what's this? They sound and look exactly the same as Formula One, as they do to a 10-year-old. And to have got myself to there in probably only 10 years since that happened, and then be winning at your home Grand Prix with everyone there who's kind of come on the journey with you, it's just a real special moment, really. And
after that season, obviously, unfortunately, Manor did end up going bust, or I don't know exactly what happened there, but unfortunately they did go under. If they had stayed alive, was there a decent possibility there was a seat for you there for 2017? Because obviously a great year in GP2, all's on the up basically.
I would like to think I was in the right place. I had shown I could win races and I was quick enough. I would assume I would have been on a short list. But there was never a short list from what I can gather, because didn't survive. So, it's one of those that I could sit here today and say, I definitely were going to be in an F1 car, but I'm not. So, it's a bit of a kind of made up scenario, because it was never
really you.
Yeah. Come December, it was never going to happen. So
when we look at 2017, you stayed in what became F2 for that year. Did everything? What would you say was different about that year? Because I guess it didn't all quite go in the way you'd have wanted after a really stellar 2016.
Yeah, that was a bit of a change in my career, really, I suppose. The Formula One kind of thing fell by the wayside to a certain degree with Manor going under, and it was then kind of a bit of a reset button. And it was kind of, what do I do? Where do I go now? Where do I go to? GTs, still try Formula One stuff. Go to America, go to Japan. You can do another 21 million things. But I got given a great opportunity with MP. And it was one of those that, well, why shouldn't I take it? It's a great opportunity. And those other options will still be there, or most of them will still be there in a year's time. So, decided to stay. Knew it was going to be a difficult year. Racing engineering, they are a race-winning proven team. With MP, they weren't. But we had a strong year. I can't complain kind of on how well I feel I drove, how well I performed. I think we were unlucky not to get some other better results. We were in good places when we picked up punches and a couple of things like that, which is just annoying. Monaco, we had a diff failure when we were looking like we were going to get a podium, and just a couple of things like that, which is just annoying because you'd quite like to have the trophy on the mantelpiece at home. But from my side, I feel like actually it was quite a strong year from kind of how well I performed.
Yeah, and the step into 2018, you decided to do something a little bit different. How big of a decision was it to go to America? I mean, it's one of the biggest sports out there, isn't it, IndyCar, or especially motorsports? I mean, it's basically their equivalent of Formula One.
I think from a racing standpoint, it wasn't a very big decision. The opportunity presented itself, and it was kind of one of those, from a motorsport standpoint, you'd be stupid not to take it. The bigger thing for me was from a personal standpoint. I quite enjoy my life in the UK, don't get me wrong. I literally just packed 2 suitcases and contract, and I was over there within probably no more than 2-3 weeks. So I literally had time to just pack a couple of suitcases, and I went over there and I turned up in an empty apartment, went to bed, and then I literally got there at midnight, and then the next day went shopping to fill the apartment. So the life decision was the hard, the personal side was the harder part of the process. Do I want to go to America? Do I want to spend the next 10, 20 years of my life in America? From a racing side, if IndyCar was in the UK or if IndyCar was like F1, it wouldn't have been an actual issue. It's more that everything I've known is potentially going to change if I get this opportunity. So obviously I did make the call and went over there. So
I mean, I guess we're glad to have you back in Europe and still doing a full season of Formula 2. And the year you missed was a new generation in the Formula 2 cycle. So you came back, and I guess half the drivers on the grid have got a year's experience in this car. Was it much of a learning curve, or had all of the career that you had before this mean that it wasn't much of an issue?
Well, yes and yes. Obviously, having an in-depth career, and I've driven lots of different cars, definitely helped and made it easier for me. I'm sure if I was jumping into it as an 18-year-old, I would have struggled a lot more. But it was difficult. I was driving it for the first time and thinking, this is miles different. It's miles different from the old Formula 2, and it's miles different from what I've been driving last year. And the thing with the IndyCar season, it actually finishes quite early. And then the Formula 2 testing wasn't until kind of March time. So I had quite a big chunk off as well, where it was, also kind of alluding to the previous question, it was quite a stressful time for a few months trying to work out what was going on. So it was a bit, when I did finally jump in a race car, it all happened very quickly, last minute. I wasn't 100%. Not ready. I was ready personally, but I didn't know I was going to be doing F2 and that side of things. So it was very much kind of, get on the plane, go, get in the car. So when I first got it, when I got in, I was a bit like, this is a bit different again. And just team dynamic and everything is different from America to Europe. So I just needed a switch again. But we ended the first test quickest, so it wasn't all bad.
Around that same sort of time, you were doing LMP2 as well. I think you did a sort of half season or a couple of races at the end of the year. Was that maybe looking towards what that could be in the future? I mean, obviously that's kind of where you're at now, but back then, was that just a tester, or was it looking towards the future?
Yeah, the LMP2 stuff came up, and with Jota, and they've clearly done a great job so far that year. So jumped at opportunity, won the first race. Was strong in Spa, but it was wet, dry, snow, rain, cancelled. It was all kicking off. So that was just whoever kind of finished the race in the right time. That was just a crazy. And then did Le Mans as well. So yeah, overall it was a good stepping stone for me to learn endurance racing, me to learn prototypes. But then obviously there's a bit of a juggle that year between Formula 2 and WEC.
And I'd say you brought back quite a bit of consistency to Manor last year, MP last year. Obviously, I think they struggled a little bit with the new car when it first came in. Was that kind of your job, to come in and help stable the ship and sort of help progress their car?
I can't say I particularly paid much attention to 2018. Just busy with my own stuff. I didn't keep a little eye on it, kind of who's winning and stuff. But yeah, then when I turned up, I know the guys at MP for years and years, and it was actually very nice. They trusted me, I trusted them, and we might not have always put out the fastest car on a race weekend, but actually I think for what we had at our disposal, we always performed well, if not overperformed. Got podiums, challenging at the front, fastest laps, and actually I had such an enjoyable season from a personal standpoint. Even one of my friends, last year playing tennis, and he just said, "Oh, you're actually a lot more relaxed about this year, aren't you? Because you could just tell the way I was talking about it." And I was like, "I'm just actually really enjoying driving." And I felt I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to prove anything to myself. I didn't need to prove anything to the team. I didn't need to prove anything to the championship, because I'd done it all before. So actually, I was just driving to get the best out of the car for the team. And I wasn't putting any pressure on myself to perform, and I just had a really good year, really. And we had
I guess when you think about it, I guess motorsport is amazing, but at the end of the day, you want to be enjoying it and just having a good time. So hearing that is nice, because I guess it means that you got to a part of your career where it's just about really enjoying it now and taking everything as it comes.
Yeah, the engineers at NP that year were Tony, Sarah, and Jeremy, the three of those I've known for a very long time. And actually, I'm happy to be kind of stuck in a room with them for a few hours, because I have a good conversation with them. We've got a lot to talk about. Well, I can't say everyone I've ever met in motorsport I'd be happy to be stuck in a room with, but with them I would be happy. So, our debriefs were always good fun. No one had to try and protect themselves. If the team messed up, they could come in to me and tell me that they'd messed up. If I'd messed up, I'd be the first to put my hand up. And you don't always get that, especially in the junior formula, when if there's a driver that's bringing a lot of money to the table, the team are going to try and protect themselves. And the drivers coming up, they're trying to prove something to get a Formula One seat or whatever. They're going to try and protect themselves. That kind of relationship, you don't always get that, especially not in the junior level of motorsport.
That brings us to the current day. Whenever we do get racing again, you'll be doing some LMP with Ginetta. I mean, that's quite a big project to be a part of, isn't it? And I guess hopefully you're enjoying it right now. Yeah,
well, there's other things this year that I can't quite tell you about that were going to happen. So it was actually going to be a really big year for me. Ginetta and LMP1, which is great to be part of. It's a great project. Lawrence, for him, this is his dream to win Le Mans. So, for a privateer in modern motorsport to come into a team and actually then compete and do a good job against big manufacturers. Toyota, they're spending hundreds of millions, where, no privateers can compete with that on the budget level, but to actually come into a world championship, world endurance championship, and they're not easy races. The shortest one's 4 hours. That's a long time. The longest one is 24 hours. So they're not easy on drivers or cars. So for them to pull a team together to build a race car and go and compete on that stage is phenomenal. And it's great to be a part of the development. Every time we got to the race weekend, so I've done 2 race weekends? Yeah, 2 race weekends with them. Every time when I first got there into the workshop, they showed me the car. But then even between going to the workshop and then going to China for the race, there was some changes again. And then from China to Bahrain, there's some changes. And there were going to be more changes again in Sebring, which we literally got stopped plane to not go on.
Jeez.
It's a cool project to be a part of. It's a bit like the Formula 3, but on steroids, because you can change more, it's faster, it's bigger, and that sort of stuff.
Well, I won't press you on what's coming up this year. I mean, hopefully, as you say, some of it gets sorted, and we all look forward to seeing what that is. Last question. I realise we've been on here for quite a long time now. What's the sort of goal for the future now? Do you want to stay in WEC, or, as you mentioned, IndyCar still a big passion? Did you want to stay involved with Formula One somehow, if you can? Don't
get me wrong. I'd love to be 10-time Formula One world champion, and if tomorrow someone turned around to me and offered me a Formula One seat, I'd snap both their hands off. Being a realist, that's probably not going to happen. Where the future lies, I don't know. We'll wait and see. But IndyCar's a great option. Super Formula is a great option. WEC's a great option. There's some great things happening in the GT world at the moment. Formula E is an option. So there's lots of things out there, but I think the problem is there's a lot of professional race drivers and not a lot of but yeah, I would aim for something that's at the top of its respective field. That's kind of where I feel I am. That's where I'm competing. So yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
Perfect. I mean, thank you so much for your time, and we really look forward to seeing what's going to go on later this year once we get racing. Best of luck, and thanks again. Cheers.
Enjoy your day. Cheers.